Have you ever noticed patterns and repetitions in your life that just seem a little too on the nose? Some folks call them coincidences, synchronicities, glitches in the simulation. If these repetitions happened in a fictional story, the audience would be like, well, that's not realistic. But when they happen in life, it's like you can see the gears turning in the universe. This summer, I began realizing key events in my life always happen on an equinox, and I also find during equinoxes, I encounter people from the southern hemisphere. During the fall equinox of 2023, I discovered someone who is doing a lot of work around the same social movement I was involved in, and who was, like me, photographing and documenting the same events I was photographing and documenting. This person was also named Carly, and the parallels in our lives are uncanny. This week on the Astrology of Terrible Things, I talk with my very own glitch in the simulation, Carly Delso Saavedra, the Southern Hemisphere Carly. We also talk about the other September 11th, 1973, the Chilean coup d'etat, an event that's pretty much been erased from American history books, but is something that everyone should know about. And it also happens to be an event that played an important role in Carly's life. Interestingly, we're recording this episode the day after Henry Kissinger, who was the key supervillain in the Chilean coup. We're recording this the day after he died. And it's a huge synchronicity because we've been planning this podcast for over a week now. The universe is bonkers, and we're about to find out what happens when we break it by talking to our cosmic doppelganger. Welcome to the Astrology of Terrible Things podcast with me, Carly Heath. And today I'm joined by Southern Hemisphere Carly, Carly Delso Saavedra, who I've talked about before on this podcast. Our paths converge during the equinox, and we have a ridiculous amount of things in common, including our names and what we've been doing this summer. In fact, the whole story of how we met may be evidence that we are, in fact, living in a simulation, and whoever's running the code has not had their coffee and is just copying and pasting without regard to how things are showing up in the material world for everyone. But before I get into all of that, this is a podcast where we bring you stories of terrible things that have happened, and then we delve into the astrology of the terrible thing and try and figure out why bad things happen. Important note, this podcast comes with all the trigger warnings. If you are triggered by death, we talk about it, so be warned. If that's not fun for you, or if that's not something that you want to listen to, then please don't listen to the show. Oh, let's get right into it. How did we meet, Carly?
Hello, Carly. Thanks for having me on the show. This is exciting. So this is so much fun. I love how we met. We met on YouTube through just the comment section on YouTube.
I know.
I had been at the rally in March from Netflix to Paramount, and I was there as a photographer and found myself pressed up against the front stage and realized that I could just maybe set up a tripod and record all of the speeches while I was taking pictures. So at the end of all of this, I have speeches, and I wanted to put them out there into the world because they're important messages to be heard.
I was looking for videos of the speeches because I played a role in creating them. And so you were one of the first people to upload videos of the speeches.
That's awesome.
They eventually came out, but really you were the one who labeled each one and had them specifically cut out. And I saw that your name was Carly, and I was like, well, that's weird. Oh, and by the way, the day that I reached out to you on YouTube was the day when I also ran into a famous Chilean actor while I was at Warner Brothers. And that was a huge big deal because that was one of the turning points where I'm realizing I meet a lot of people from the Southern Hemisphere around the equinox. Also, at that moment, at Warner Brothers, found myself surrounded by Australians and just for the longest time, just chatting with a bunch of Australians. And I was like, this is triggering memories for me. And the Australians were like, oh yeah, people from the southern hemisphere wake up during the fall equinox because this is our summertime. And I'm like, that makes sense too. But also, like, I did another podcast for someone else with an Australian, and I was like, I'm surrounded by southern hemisphere people. But what was especially startling is I had already been following for like a while your Twitter account, which is Our Flag Means Strike, which is leveraging and mobilizing the Our Flag Means Death fandom to help the strike efforts, especially at Warner Brothers. And you had already been at Warner Brothers a bunch of times, which is the main place that I had been all summer. But we just hadn't crossed paths until the equinox.
That's kind of amazing.
So we have a ridiculous amount of things in common. We are both have had our lives, our brains, our DNA chemistry changed by Our Flag Means Death. And my love for Stede Bonnet, Gentleman Pirate, is my entire identity since 2022 when that show dropped. And I know that Stede Bonnet, Gentleman Pirate, has played a huge role in your life.
Mr. Stede Bonnet, yes. However, I am Blackbeard. Like I
like that's as a Scorpio, you're a Blackbeard. And as like
a Scorpio,
as a Libra, I'm very like I identify with Stede Bonnet. Definitely.
Yeah. No, he's definitely a cutie pie, but my identity is actually all in a Blackbeard, which I find a fun balance with like how you and I already have everything in common, and this is kind of like in terms of a fandom, like coming in from like these two main characters that are opposites but not. It's awesome.
But you also kind of like inspired by the show decided to kind of change your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like no, my life absolutely took a huge turn, and it did for so many people in the fandom. Just in the theme of the show and kind of the hope that it gave in a story arc that tells you that life can just go on, that this isn't an ending, that life just can go on, and that it's never too late to restart something if you find yourself in a rut, or if you find yourself like sad and lost and broken.
Yeah, so, and like
the show is all about that.
And like you're the same age, around the same age as the characters, and you kind of like you saw like, oh wow, this character is like making a huge change in his life and choosing adventure like in a middle-aged space, and you're like, I can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, it resonated with me so much. I mean, the show just captivated me from the very first episode. I think by the time Blackbeard was introduced, where I could see like full body outfit, like I was already, while watching the show, like reaching into my closet to find out like what I already had in order to cosplay this character. And I've only ever cosplayed once before for one person. So like it's not even like, it wasn't even in my like, I don't know, chemistry to like go out and cosplay this character in Comic-Cons and everything. But like Blackbeard inspired me to even on that level do the costuming for him. I think Mary with her We Only Live This One Life like inspired me to finally let go of something that had been sad and lonely and dragging me, kind of just dragging my heart in making hard decisions with people that we love. So this show actually inspired me to divorce my partner of like 27 years, because it just
27 by the way, astrology people who are listening are hearing 27 and are like, oh, 27 is the Saturn return of your relationship. That's 27 is a big year. So 27 basically is when Daddy Saturn, who is the kind of taskmaster, the teacher, the stern teacher rather than the fun teacher, comes along and is like, have you learned whatever lesson that this 27 years has been meant to teach you? And sometimes then at that point, the lesson is to release that thing, or cause like a conflict that makes you realize, oh, I need to end this, because Saturn is the planet of endings. Or sometimes it's about crystallizing something and like having a new awareness of it, and then that's changing the direction that you're going forward with it. But in this case, it's like you decided, okay, an ending is going to happen and it's going to be a divorce.
Yeah, and yeah, this is awesome. I love that. I have to admit my ignorance about a lot of astrology and numbers and stuff.
This is really good, because you'll be able to stop me if I say something and you're like, wait, what do you mean by that? Like, then I'll be able to like explain what it means. And by the way, you guys are probably listening and you're like, wait a minute, we're talking about astrology, we're talking about Henry Kissinger, we're talking about the Chilean coup, we're talking about doppelgangers, we're talking about our flag means death. This is what you get when you come to Carly's podcast. You're going to get all the things. But you know, our flag means death, the Chilean coup, Henry Kissinger, they are all, you know, part of the material existence that is human life, and that we're exploring and we're studying the themes through an archetypal lens, which is my jam.
Love it. I'm so glad I met you, Carly.
Oh, I'm so glad I met you too. Interestingly as well, this kind of decision to divorce happened when you were 48. And 48 in Indian astrology is a time when the South Node, which is something we'll talk about when we look at your chart, crystallizes. It brings your spiritual awareness or spiritual lesson that you learned over the past 48 years into material existence. And so that when you turned 48, that was the crystallization of a spiritual lesson that you had spent basically 4 cycles learning, because every 12 years is a cycle, and this kind of mythical exploration of how life is divided up. And when you turn 48, that crystallizes the lessons of the South Node, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But usually it's related to endings, like letting go of something.
That is awesome. So yeah, so going on the theme of letting go, like just letting go of the fear of releasing something that provided so much stability and security in my life. So tying back into Chile and being a political refugee and coming into this country and, you know, not knowing anybody, not having family or community. My closest brother and sister to my age and me, we think of ourselves as feral kids. Like we just ran wild and did what we needed to do in order to survive, which is exactly what both my parents did. They just did what they needed to do in order to survive. So 27 years of this marriage provided a shelter, and it provided something that at the very beginning of all of this, I really just desperately needed some kind of an anchor, some kind of a force that would just kind of make space for me. So to release that and to kind of like fall into this place of kind of fear, but also curiosity, and kind of coming into like my own strength in being alone and being kind of an individual in the world, rather than like this couple that I'd kind of gotten lost into over those years, like was definitely an awakening, releasing.
That's amazing. And in a way, was like the fandom, the Our Flag Means Death fandom, kind of like a net for you, a little like
Absolutely.
a little like, here's like this extremely loving community. And I've never like in the way that the strikes and the pickets were, the Our Flag Means Death community, it has its problems, but it's like an extremely loving community. And it's kind of like, if someone loves the show, chances are they're good people. Like the show does attract a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
Have you ever, for me, I can honestly say I have never loved a work of art as much as I love Our Flag Means Death. I have never been as enraptured by a work of art as much as Our Flag Means Death. Is that kind of the same thing for you? Has it been like, wow, I love this an insane amount?
Yeah, it's kind of it's all encompassing in a non-creepy way.
Yeah.
Like there's absolutely things that I've loved. Like Lord of the Rings is something that like is just a forever love for me. Like the entire, like the world that it built and everything. But I didn't, I wasn't inspired to like go out and find people to go and to talk about this, to try to connect with people. This is my first fandom, official
Yeah.
fandom. So I even had to like Google what is a fandom, like so finding people who were writing the stories and were making the artwork and doing the cosplay, and just this building up of a creative community that was inspired because of this show. And over I started my first like kind of thread into this fandom was through Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And through Facebook I started like following people out into the world of like AO3, and eventually found my way back into Twitter, specifically only just for this fandom, and because it was just this complete sense of awe that I was finding over and over from all these folks who were just like, I haven't been inspired to write in
Mm-hmm.
a literal decade, and suddenly the show comes along and I'm writing fan fiction again. And
I
same
had
with
the
the artists,
same
like yeah.
thing. Yeah. I had a real like block with my writing where it was feeling like work and I wasn't having that same flow. And then I started writing Our Flag Means Death fan fiction. And I've written 100,000 words just this summer of
It's amazing.
Our Flag Means Death fan fiction. And it's the most like, this is all I want to do. Like I work and then I open up my computer during my lunch break or whatever, and I'm just like instantly Our Flag Means Death fan fiction, blah blah blah, writing, and getting people saying like more, I want more, I want to read it. I can't wait to see the next chapter, what you do next, and I'm like that encouragement, that immediate like feedback, but also just like I can embody these characters, I can envision conflicts for them, like, and it's just and it's they're also like working through issues that I'm working through in myself, and it's extremely healing, and it's a ridiculous amazing thing how healing and creative inducing this show is.
Yeah,
I've
well,
never had experienced anything like it.
That's what inspired Our Flag Means Strike. Like we got together when the writers first went on strike, because this show is so complete in how it tells its story. We wanted to support those writers who created this world for us to all like fall into and meet each other and build each other, build up from. So like it speaks to the strength of how well the story is told, how well the story is written, and then having the actors come into it as well, wanting to support that in every way we could as like just fans of a show, and figuring out how to do that for the picket line was kind of a fun ride.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's like, the kind of parallels of how we meet, of me like going there because yeah, it's part of my like job that I'm doing. But you are on your own just as a volunteer, as someone who's passionate about, the movement of workers' rights, but also supporting the art and the artists. And you're just volunteering your time. And that's amazing that the parallels there. Some other parallels that you and I have, we both have an orange cat. We're both vegetarian. We're both queer. Your mom's revolutionary like alias name was Carly.
Yep. She took her name is Carmen, and she needed something to use as like her alias for all of the murals that they would write. She was a college student at the time and 7 months pregnant with me when the coup d'etat happened, and was like sneaking out after curfew and scaling fences and writing like message imperialist messages on the walls, and like putting all these murals up in like the dead of night. And like one of her name was part of like Carmen, but wanting to add some kind of an ending to it, and made up my name on that.
That's amazing. So your mom was an artist.
Yes. Yeah. Like, muralist. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, she's a painter, muralist, a poet. She's amazing.
Because I'm an artist too, and that's amazing to me. I mean, and I've been thinking about doing street art. Maybe your mom has inspired me to get into my street art like dream. Let's briefly pop in and look at your chart.
Mm.
And then we'll talk about the Chilean coup. So your North Node is in Cancer, just like Salvador Allende. His South Node is in Cancer, and your North Node is in Cancer. So this is a good time for us to talk about what the nodes are.
Yes, please.
The nodes are mathematical points between the sun and the moon, that whenever the sun and the moon line up on these points, that is when an eclipse happens. And an eclipse usually happens like 4 times a year: solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, solar eclipse, lunar eclipse. And the nodes move into different portions of the zodiac every 18 months or so. And the mythology, like the ancient mythology around what eclipses are and what the nodes are, is that in ancient times, there's this idea that there was a dragon, and the dragon wanted the elixir of immortality that the immortal gods were drinking. So the dragon like dressed up in a disguise, went to the party where the immortal gods were drinking their immortal elixir, and he tried to drink the immortal elixir, but the gods found him out and chopped off his head. And the head of the dragon went into one part of the sky, and the tail, or the anus of the dragon, went into the other part of the sky. And they're forever kept apart. And so whenever there's an eclipse, it's the head and the tail of the dragon. And in your birth chart, wherever the head of the dragon is, which is the North Node, that is your place of insatiable hunger. And I want this thing so bad. And throughout the whole course of your life, you will never be satiated wherever your North Node is. It's so interesting looking at your chart and then looking at the Chilean coup and looking at Salvador Allende's chart, because it's all like connected. And the South Node is usually where you will be releasing things, especially when there's eclipses happening. You'll be letting things go. Like I know when the eclipse was happening in my last year, my 2 doggies passed away. I lost my job. So it's letting go of things that their time has come and they're ready to pass out of material existence. But it's also a very spiritual place, because where you're able to let go of things, that's when you're having like a spiritual awareness of, oh, that's something that's really hard for humans in the material world to really grasp, is when something is ready to let go, to release. Because your North Node is in Cancer, there is this desire to provide for others. There's this desire for nurturing, especially for you in your 8th house, which deals with the idea of connecting with someone and sharing resources with someone. What's your relationship to things like what you owe people, debts and things like that?
Like on a personal level, like I always
Yeah,
keep it all even.
yeah.
When it comes to like credit cards, I have a little bit of trouble, but
Yeah. Yeah, and there is for you, there's a Saturn, which is the planet of endings and restriction, has recently, before you were born, passed your North Node. So during the Chilean coup, the Saturn was exactly over the North Node, and so that reflects there was this ideal to distribute wealth to workers, to expand Chile's middle class. I was looking at all the things that Salvador did. Like he made education available. He was trying to get health care to everyone. He was trying to raise everyone's salaries and wages while keeping the cost of things low. And when I go through this long list of everything he's accomplished, I'm like, oh my God, like we we in the United States are like, well, we kept this guy president for 4 years because he didn't have anything too bad happen. But like Salvador, he was like literally doing all the things. He was like, just the list of accomplishments was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And Saturn coming along and is putting an end to that. So there is a lesson in your life that's kind of something that you're going to always be throughout the whole course of your life, yearning for, thinking about your relationship with other people's resources, freedom in a way, some sort of freedom from debts, freedom from the desire to kind of connect with other people, but like also that strange back and forth between connection and freedom. Does that any of that make sense?
Like I was starting to catch on a little bit with like that northern node of like the insatiable,
Mm-hmm.
kind of leading into wanting to help others and serve. Like
Yeah.
those two definitely resonate with like what I've just tried to do all of my life.
Yeah.
And like through photography specifically. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And when we look at your chart, since you are born during the daytime, the
Mm.
best part of your life is your siblings. Is that true?
Yeah, I do
And,
love them immensely.
and the most challenging part of your life is your creativity and your relationship to romance and possibly children. Have you ever thought about having children, and or is that like something, because the Mars makes me think and the moon and the Aries makes me think that probably not interested in having children?
Yeah, I think so. I biologically, of course, like there were points in my life where I was just like, yeah, babies, we need to make babies right now.
Oh,
But no, I think overall, like arc has been no kids, and I think recently, my brother and sister, again, the ones closest to my age, who were kind of part of this kids, who were raising kids in another country that my parents were at the time. Like unconsciously, all of us decided not to have kids. Like we didn't none of us had kids in the end, like my closest brother and sister to me. And I think part of that was just kind of thinking about, like we were thinking about how that is unconscious way of like stopping generational trauma in its tracks. So
yes.
yeah, no, kids is not happening with any of my siblings on at least the part of my mom's side. So yeah.
Mm. And but it's interesting. It also says this part of your chart deals with your relationship to creativity, and so your relationship to creativity and art making. There's some tension there. There's
Mm.
some conflict there. What kind of conflict or tension? Maybe self-doubt, anxiety. Have you felt like you're thwarted by something in some way?
This is so cool. Thanks for asking.
No problem.
So photography specifically, I fell into it in high school, fucking fell in love with it. I did a lot through high school into college. I actually studied it as my major in college and was in like full all in. And then I got married, and then I think there's this relationship of, and it runs through my head like Gandalf, to be a photographer is to be alone.
Yeah.
So like as a couple, I didn't give myself permission to like go off into the world and document the things that I wanted to document, because it was just like there was home life and there's work, and the cycle of home life and work just kind of took over. There were a few times where like I was able to, because something big was happening, like the building up of the second war in the Gulf, I found a bunch of anarchists to run down the streets with and take pictures of, and
Oh, I love
then
that.
and it was a really
Anarchist
good time.
photography is such a Aries fifth house with Mars in there, Mars and the moon. Anarchist photography. I love it.
Yeah, so photography has been the anchor that kind of has been like where my creativity has always found its kind of found its roots, like its deepest roots. And I've put that camera down so many times over and over again over like these 50 years. And kind of tying it back into gay pirates, like I dusted off my camera quite literally in order to attend ECCC and take
Mhm.
pictures of people in cosplay, because I wanted to start documenting this incredible fandom. And so like probably prior to that, it was like 2001 when I had like when I
Mm.
was in it and running around and trying to like kind of nourish this passion of photography again. And then I put the camera down and I had to come back into it again because of this. So
Oh, good.
yeah, so that maybe that tension is just kind of like I've always I've wandered away from it, for all these different reasons, but like every time I come back, it's like I find my passion and my fire and like the drive that just kind of moves me forward every time. So
Passion and fire are very Mars words. We love to see it. And hopefully now that you've passed your 48th year, where you have crystallized whatever that North Node, South Node life lesson that you've been going through related to, and you encapsulate it perfectly, that conflict between the married life and the photography life, and how to be a photographer is to be alone, and all of that. That's such a perfect Cancer, Capricorn, North Node, South Node axis, and with the Mars and Moon in your fifth house, it's just the story there is all in your chart, like, is what I'm saying. And so I'm hoping that if you have crystallized and learned this lesson, that then you can blossom as a photographer, especially if you can really leverage groups of people, because that is kind of your destiny as a photographer, is photographing groups of people doing things.
And no, absolutely. Movement, like
movements.
There's like this there's this pull, and it's I was born into it. I was born into the what is it, the dying embers of like this revolutionary idea in my country, but it was about the movement of like the people, and people being united, the power of the people, all of that. So every time I start seeing that kind of like in the world around me, that's when I have that instinct to grab my camera and hit the streets and go.
Very cool. So something that you should pay attention to, maybe write down this date, on December 22nd, Mercury will be in what's called a cazimi, exactly on your south node. And one of my favorite astrologers, Adam Ellenboss, says this is like inheriting a noble but difficult mission. So there's some major turning point that's going to be happening in your life around December 22nd. And so something that's really interesting in your chart, like I've said this in previous podcast episodes, me and Jesse, the co-host of this podcast, we both have this 0 degree Libra Aries axis, where my ascendant is 0 degrees Libra. Her ascendant, since moving to Vegas, is 0 degrees Aries. And your nodes, which are very important parts of your life, are at 0 degrees Cancer and Capricorn. So you're kind of like in our tribe a little bit. But whereas me and Jesse are equinox children, you are a solstice child. So whereas me and Jesse are like equal part, we are the balance, equal parts light and dark. You are the highest point of light. Your nodes are on the day when there is the absolute most light in the sky. That's the solstice. And your south node, when you have this Mercury cazimi, that is going to be during the darkest part of the year. So I'm really curious to see how the symbolism of a very dark day, where there is the shortest day of the year, where the longest night of the year, and we've talked a little bit about the depression both you and I are experiencing because of the mixture of being in the northern hemisphere during the winter is a bummer. And this, with the strikes being over, we feel like our purpose has been diffused, and we're like, what are we doing? We've lost that camaraderie. So both of us are dealing with depression. So I kind of wonder what that story is going to be for you. So I hope you'll tell me when it happens.
Yeah, I'll pay
December.
extra attention on December 22nd.
Yeah, pay extra attention. This is our charts together. I'm a Libra rising. So Libra is your 11th house. You have Pluto and Uranus in your 11th house, but your 11th house is triggered because it's that where Mars, your 5th house, is opposing, is Mars is opposing that Uranus in the 11th house. So you love social change movements. I think as a Libra, as a equinox Libra at 0 degrees Libra, I love social change too, because that's what the equinox is all about. It's all about change. I feel like we're always going to be involved in groups. Like that's our dynamic, something related to groups and fandoms and movements. And I think that's really interesting. Oh, I'm just curious. What kind of kid were you growing up?
I had to grow up pretty quickly. So I was definitely like the kind of the parent to my two younger siblings. While my parents had to like do the things that they needed to do in order to survive. So I was definitely more sedate, serious. I was the one that kind of followed up with like any kind of bureaucracy that we would run into, being like just really poor and needing to like talk to, I don't know, social workers and stuff like that. I was the one that was the person who dealt with all of that stuff. I did my mom's taxes, and she sometimes would pull me out of class when I was in high school to like go to her classes in college so I could take notes for her and stuff. So I was the adult. I was a big little kid.
Oh, wow. And that's really interesting too, because, okay, you're a Sagittarius rising and your Jupiter is in Aquarius. And Aquarius is like a Saturn ruled sign. Saturn is about structure. Saturn is an old sign, so often it's associated with that old soul energy, that like mature energy. So usually Jupiter is like the fun, the fun, exciting, the laughing planet. But Jupiter in a Saturn ruled sign is a little bit more serious, but you still come across as a lighthearted person. So I feel like you have that balance of like being like lighthearted, but like also you can get stuff done.
Yeah, for sure. I think not taking myself too seriously is a good deal.
You're also 12th house. You're a 12th house sun person like me. So I'm curious, have you ever had a paranormal experience?
Yes, very much on the fringes of like on the very peripheral area, because my mom is really strong. She's had conversations with like spirits and stuff like that.
I love it. Oh my God. Yes. That's so cool.
My mom is very strong. But I like relationship. So when my cat Flaco, who was my little orange cat, my heart, when he passed away, there was for many years I would kind of catch him, kind of a blur of him in the corner of my eye, like throughout the house I would just see him. And then I think like there was I think I told you the one where we had baby chickens, and like I remember being at school and hearing one of the chickens like scream, and then by the time I got home, the chicken was okay, but like it had fallen into the oatmeal and it was like struggling, and we were able to like get a little chicken out and like clean them up and everything, and they survived. But like I just very distinct, like I heard my chicken in the middle of school day. To find them in distress. So like there's a couple like those kind of things where I'm just like, okay, needing to keep the peripherals open, but also like trusting a connection to intuition and trusting that intuition, because it has led me to some good places.
Yeah, you have Mercury retrograde and your sun in your 12th house, which is the house of the liminal realm. I call it. It's the land between the spiritual world and the material world. And so I find people with 12th house energy, like you can communicate with spirits, you can see things that maybe people who are like very like material oriented and very like worldly cannot see. I kind of think of myself as I'm constantly like on this threshold between the imaginary world and the like real world. And I feel like I can easily like open the door to the imaginary world and like live there for like a really long time. Do you ever feel like that?
Yeah, well, I forgot to say your writing is incredible, and I hope that you're promoting it through your podcast. It's amazing. Yeah, that the magical realism, like reality, but like one foot in dreams at all times, and kind of being okay in that space, versus shutting that out and dealing with like kind of the material reality of this one. I'm much more comfortable in the other space.
You're more comfortable in the imaginary space?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Oh, yeah, that reminds me of, yeah, I always have one foot in the gravy basket.
Yeah, I just finished that one.
Yeah, you reminded me of that line. And I was like, actually, Buttons is a character that I feel like I relate to. He's probably like I relate to Steve Bonnet most, but like I definitely relate to Buttons so much. I'm like, I know what he is about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the amazing synchronicity that happened, we've been planning this episode like for whatever, a week or so, or 2 weeks. I was like, I want to do an episode on the Chilean coup, and we'll also do an episode on our weird things that we have in common. So I was preparing for this talk yesterday, and as I was getting ready to work, I was listening to the news, this news report about the CIA and its role in UFO retrieval. And I was like, whoa, that's bonkers. Because I had been thinking a lot about the CIA because I'd been like preparing for this episode on the Chilean coup. And so I was thinking, I'm going to have to talk about the UFO and the CIA thing in this podcast. But I was just like so interested in the Chilean coup stuff. I spent my whole lunchtime like reading up about the Chilean coup, about Nixon, about Henry Kissinger, the CIA. And as I'm riding my bike home, there's this huge, gorgeous rainbow that appears, like, and I saw this rainbow for like the longest time. It was like a huge portion of my ride home was like looking at this rainbow. And I was like, this has to be an omen of some sort. Something that I'm thinking about right now must be manifesting in the world. And I get home and I open up my laptop and I see Henry Kissinger has died. And that is when I texted you and I was like, oh my God, Henry Kissinger has died. And you told your mom, and what did your mom say?
My mom was so cute. She was like, "Yay!" And my dad was like, "It's about time."
But so, what a coincidence on the one day where I'm like super focused on like this on the Chilean coup stuff and researching it and learning about it, and that happens to be the day that Henry Kissinger died. Amazing.
No, I love the symbolism of that beautiful rainbow in the sky. And then you reaching out to me because I had not heard. I don't think I would have heard until today, but like you reached out to me to let me know on the day that it happened, and that means a lot because
yeah, and you guys go out partying and celebrating.
I went out and had a little yeah, poured out for like my homies from Chile.
Yeah,
not for the one who passed away just now. So
it's
funny because sorry.
Oh no, keep going. What were you saying? It was funny because
I found out about Pinochet dying when I was at a farmer's market. Like it was just something that came up on my phone, and I'm like standing in front of I'm like trying to buy some groceries at the farmer's market, and I looked down at my phone, and Pinochet is dead. And I run into some people who I used to run with as like the anarchists. And I just walked right up to them and I just like stared at them and I said, Pinochet's dead. And then like waterworks.
Oh my God.
And then I went and sat in curb and cried for quite a bit longer.
Oh my God.
What do you do? Like that's such a huge like this incredible like oppressive force that has been a part of like my everyday from even before I was born. So like for that to just suddenly be gone, yeah. And he never faced any like Kissinger never faced any kind of consequences for any of those actions. So a relief that he was gone, but like, damn. Yeah. I really wanted him to do some time.
It's amazing the collective release that I feel like is occurring now that Henry Kissinger's dead, and I'm sure was occurring when Pinochet died. Just like, oh God, the evil is defeated. But it's also the shame or the feeling that I was having, which is like, how dare he got to live this long life. He got to die possibly peacefully, which judging by his chart, he probably died peacefully during a Venus year while Venus was in Libra. Astrology tells us the universe is not fair. The universe is just a cycle of good and evil. It's a shame. But for anyone who's listening and who's not aware of what Henry Kissinger did and how he is basically the definition of a supervillain,
Mm.
This is some portions of an op-ed by Dr. Saeed Ahmed that was published in the Daily Star. People in Asia know Kissinger for his infamous role in Bangladesh, killing millions, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. He prolonged the war there and initiated carpet bombing in Cambodia, which killed 150,000 people. Now, when I was in school, I learned about Cambodia, but it wasn't put into the context of the US did this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We did this to Cambodia. We killed 150,000 people. It was just like, oh, isn't this terrible? This what life is like in Cambodia. Anyway, but this is what I learned as I'm growing up and eventually going to college and learning about things. I'm like, oh my gosh, all this stuff was filtered through this pro-American, pro-imperialist lens. And then when I go to college and actually like learn about the nuances of a situation, we're like, oh wow, the whole world is trying to find ways to redistribute wealth, to make things more equal for everyone, to make sure workers' wages stay up and corporate profits are equitable and resources are distributed to people. America is this giant force that pushes Western imperialism, which is funded by corporations, and we will literally kill millions of people, and we will put fascists in power. We will do whatever it takes to stop equity from happening elsewhere, just so that we can keep our American corporations profitable for the ultra wealthy. Okay, so this is what Henry Kissinger in Indonesia. He was actively involved in Suharto's killing spree and attack that in East Timor that killed at least 100,000 people. It was Kissinger's plan for General Augusto Pinochet, a fascist, to overthrow and kill Chile's democratically elected Salvador Allende in 1973 with extensive support from the CIA. The Nixon administration was actually willing to work with Allende, but Kissinger, in typical Machiavellian style, convinced the president to end him instead. After the coup, Pinochet continued his murderous repression with full American support, which Kissinger endured. With an assassin-like apathy, Kissinger repeated the same in 1976 after an Argentine coup overthrow President Isabel Perón, where the military rulers carried out atrocities on an even greater scale. In the so-called Operation Condor that followed, left-wingers were killed throughout Latin America, which some in the State Department pointed out, but Kissinger muffled all such voices. This was a repetition of events in Bangladesh, where Archer Blood was ostracized by the administration for sending reports of Pakistan's genocidal activities in Dhaka. Kissinger's ambitions and ruthlessness directly resulted in widespread murders and indiscriminate slaughter in Indochina, Bangladesh, Chile, East Timor, the Vietnam War, including conflicts in Laos and Cambodia, perhaps received the greatest publicity in the world press, partly because of the huge public protests in many countries of the world, including the US. Kissinger knew well that it was an unwinnable war, but he still continued it, causing many deaths that could have been avoided. Later, he made sure before interviews that any book about him would not mention or have any questions about the Vietnam War. During the Yom Kippur War between Israel and the Arabs in 1973, he allowed the Israeli army to advance before initiating any diplomatic efforts to stop the war. Later, the US replenished Israel's defense equipment with arms worth $2 billion when Golda Meir asked for 150 million instead. Kissinger left his marks in every continent, almost every country, with similar effects such as large-scale civilian deaths, economic devastation, and perpetual shifting of the balance of power, favoring an ally. It is possible that Henry Kissinger has played a role in the mass murder of more people than anyone in human history. And he died at 100 during his fifth house year, where Venus was his time lord. The only thing I can think of is maybe Venus was his time lord because all of us are happy Venus is the planet of happiness, joy, harmony. Maybe all of us are happy that he died. I hope that he did not die a comfortable death. I hope he suffered immensely.
I've
But
seen a lot of joy online for it.
yeah, we have seen a lot of joy
Mm-hmm.
online for it. And this happened after a full moon in Gemini, which is his rising sign. I'll show you his chart. He is a Gemini rising with Mars in his first house, very close to his ascendant, very much like Trump, Sun and Mercury retrograde in Gemini. And this is why astrology, I feel like, always shows very objectively who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. The first house, which represents like, this is who this person is. He's a day chart, so that means Mars is the baddest planet, and he has Mars in his first house. He's a bad guy, pretty straightforward. And Mercury retrograde in his first house is ruling, a combust Mercury with the sun very much there. So whenever I see, Mercury combust in a very important angle in someone's chart, this is someone who's very dictated by what his father taught him. And there's this idea he had throughout his life that if you are weak, you should be defeated. Power and strength is the most important thing. And that must be some sort of wound. Like, you can see Venus there, which is that planet of harmony, ethics. It's in his 12th house. It's in the part of the chart that he can't see. And Jupiter is retrograde in his chart, ruled by Mars. So Jupiter is the benefic that's associated with justice and what's good and right and morals and all of that. And so these planets that are associated with goodness and morals, these are in parts of his chart that he cannot see. The most benefic planet in his chart, which is Jupiter, is being ruled by that retrograde Mars in his first house, which is being ruled by a retrograde Mercury that's combust. So morals, he is pure logic without morals. He is pure strategy without ethics. And when you live your life just like, how can I bring power to my country without any regard for what it morally, ethically means, you will be willing to kill lots of people. And interestingly, when Mercury retrograde is often called, at this part of the Mercury retrograde, when it's kind of getting close to the sun, is called the psychopomp. So in mythology, this is the Mercury that brings the souls into the underworld. And Mars being a planet that's associated with killing, so this man is responsible for bringing so many souls to the underworld. He's the psychopomp. Now let's talk about the Chilean coup. What was your earliest memory of learning about what happened in your country?
So we came to the United States when I was about 5. And by the time I was 6, we were living in Iowa City, Iowa, which has, because of the University of Iowa, both my parents were accepted into the University of Iowa. And so from my earliest memories, I remember just being part of any of those student marches about human rights in the world. So I remember marching when it came to Nicaragua, and marching when it came to El Salvador, and going to protests, going to rallies as a kid, because
And this
my
was
parents were very involved in that.
In the 70s?
This was, so like late 70s, early 80s. Even like in high school, there was like a giant walkout for that first Gulf War. The entire school walked out on.
Wow.
But I think my earliest memories were but being very politically aware of the fact that like a lot of shit's going down in the world. It's not for the benefit of the people. It's always been for the benefit of money, and people in power with money.
Yeah, definitely. And Iowa, so growing up in Iowa, that seems like a very conservative state. Was it?
Yeah, so the University of Iowa is a little blue blip in the state. When I was growing up, it was leaning a lot more toward purple, but now it's firmly in the red, with the exception of these little blue blips here and there. So
Salvador Allende, who we need to know a little bit about to kind of understand the Chilean coup, he's a democratic socialist, committed to democracy. He has been described as the first Marxist to be elected president in a liberal democracy in Latin America. Allende's life, like many other revolutionaries, has been unfortunately stripped of a lot of context and reduced to symbolism, and people do not really know just how many things that he's accomplished. You know, we think of the moment of his death when we think of him, but he had this whole life, very, very interesting life. And I was trying to find documentaries about him, biographies about him. And there's one really good documentary that is not available in the United States in English. It's on Amazon Prime. It's called Salvador Allende, and it like won at Cannes. So it had done really, really well, but we can't get access to it. And seems to be a theme in the United States. We can't get access to a lot of the details about his life, and it would be really great. I would love if there was like a really good English language documentary or book that we could get to kind of get the full picture of his life. He was born June 26, 1908, if anyone wants to play along and look at his chart, in the port city of Valparaiso. He was the fourth child of Salvador Allende Castro and Laura Gosens Uribe. And he, as was the tradition in Chile, he was named after his deceased elder sibling. He had a sister born 3 years later, and he was in an established middle-class professional family that came from a radical lineage. On his father's side, Allende was descended from a long line of revolutionary Masons. His grandfather, Ramon Allende, had been a liberal, a philanthropist, and a social reformer, but not a socialist. Salvador, though, imbued with the Marxist critique of capitalism and influenced by the revolutionary times he was living in growing up in the 20s and 30s, took the decision to struggle for a total transformation of society, building upon and extending the ideas of his progressive ancestors. Now, in 1930, the average lifespan in Chile was 35 years for a man and 37 years for a woman. Allende wanted to improve this. He went to medical school. He was influenced by a professor who's a German pathologist who emphasized social medicine and the social determinants of disease and social medicine. This is a chart of the life expectancy in Chile. And as you can see down here, from 1875 to like 1920, 25, or even 30, most people lived barely above 30. I was like, oh my gosh, why was the life expectancy in Chile so low for so long? And most of the land was controlled by white elites who had large estates called haciendas. The majority of the voters were workers who were instructed to vote for the hacienda owner's candidate, basically. So these Chilean elites controlled a lot of the government. It was a country that was established on racist foundations, and the mestizo laborers were basically just like given a small subsistence plot to grow their own food and survive on. Social medicine was what Allende was about, which is an interdisciplinary field that focuses on the interplay between socioeconomic factors and individual health outcomes. It's rooted in the challenges of the Industrial Revolution, which the Industrial Revolution seemed to lead to a lot of that like low longevity, short lifespan issues. He received his medical degree in 1932 from the University of Chile, where he was a Marxist activist, and he participated in the founding of Chile's Socialist Party, which was founded in 1933. So exactly 90 years ago this year, which is really fascinating. After election to the Chamber of Deputies in 1937, he served from 1939 to 42 as Minister of Health in the liberal leftist coalition. And interesting, so you both Allende and you are like in the health field. I just find that kind of interesting. And you both have your nodes in the same sort of place. And so he was elected to the Senate in 1945. He became president of the Senate in 1966. He introduced legislation that established the Chilean Health Service, the first program in the Americas to guarantee universal health care. He did it back in the 50s. We in the United States still haven't figured it out. His 3 unsuccessful bids for presidency prompted him to joke that his epitaph would be, "Here lies the next president of Chile." Declassified documents show that from 1962 to 1964, the CIA spent a total of $2.6 million to finance the campaign of Eduardo Frei and $3 million in anti-Allende propaganda to scare voters away from Allende's FRAP coalition. The CIA considered its role in the victory of Frei a great success. On September 4th, he won finally the Chilean presidential election. It by plurality, so whoever gets the most votes wins. So he got 36% of the votes, and there were basically 3 main running candidates. But then when he ran again, right, in 1973, he got even more votes. So he had like 40% of the vote. So he had pretty close to almost getting like a majority in like a plural system. So people were a fan of how he did when he was president. In his speech following his election, he said, "We are moving towards socialism because the people, through their vote, have freely rejected capitalism as a system, which has resulted in a crudely unequal society." Yes, exactly. A society deformed by social injustice and degraded by the deterioration of the very foundations of human solidarity.
Like, how inspiring is that? Jesus, like to think of like my mom and my dad as teenagers in this time, like hearing these speeches and how they moved them to like break curfew laws and run through the streets after his death.
I know. And before we started recording, I was telling you about I was listening to a Khan Academy lecture on Allende, and just in America, like the propaganda is Marxist, immediately bad. They don't even define what Marxism is. He just like basically said, well, he's a bad guy because he's Marxist. This guy did so much for better, and none of that is acknowledged in any American academic books or what's taught in school at all. Upon assuming presidency, Allende began to carry out his platform of implementing a socialist program called the Chilean Path to Socialism that included the nationalization of large-scale industries, notably copper mining and banking. And the copper thing was a problem, right? Because the copper mining and the telecom industry were intricately connected, and a lot of the copper mines were owned by American corporations. Is that right?
U.S. interests, U.S. investment.
And so
they wanted the money.
Yeah, so the Americans were not a fan of the nationalization of the copper mining. And so this is when Nixon got butthurt, and Kissinger was like, we need to protect our corporate interests. We need to protect our millionaires and make sure our millionaires are making more millions. So this guy who is making sure that wages are rising in Chile and costs of living are staying down and low, and who's giving universal health care to people, and who's giving education for people, who's doing the most good. We're going to take him out just so that American businessmen can keep on making more billions. This is how America operates. It's, oh my God, when the more you think about this and the more you learn about this, you're like, mind blown how evil this country can be. And
and how much it's motivated on money and power.
Exactly.
The power that money brings. Like that's just its driving force.
He had let's see, so he was implementing healthcare, education, he was redistributing lands, and nationalized between 1/5 and 1/4 of all properties. He improved the socioeconomic welfare of Chile's poorest citizens, nationalized enterprises and public work projects. And in 1970, he gave 3,000 scholarships to Mapuche children in an effort to integrate the indigenous minority into the educational system. 120,000 residential buildings. Can you imagine if in the United States we're like, we're going to build 120,000 apartment buildings to give houses to people?
Mm.
Would never happen. Would never
Yeah.
happen. When we have a president, we're like, oh, he was a good president. He kept evil from happening. But like Allende's actually doing the thing. He fixed bread prices, sent 55,000 volunteers to the country to teach writing and reading skills and provide medical attention to a part of the population that had been previously ignored. He had an obligatory minimum wage for workers of all ages. Free school meals were
Including
established.
apprentices, which is a nice one.
Yeah, rent reductions, social security payments, public works program, exemptions on taxes to small proprietors. And according to one estimate, purchasing power for individuals went up by 28% between 1970 and 1971. So the common theme in the United States when we talk about Allende is that he destroyed the economy.
Mm-hmm.
He destroyed the economy for who? Because it seems like for like the average middle class worker, they were able to finally like afford to buy things and to live.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if you were a large corporate entity, you probably weren't doing great. But it seems like for the average citizen, life was getting better. Nixon wanted to protect American geopolitical interests by preventing the spread of communism during the Cold War. In 1970, Nixon informed the CIA that the Allende government in Chile would not be acceptable and authorized $10 million to stop Allende from coming to power, or they wanted to unseat him. A CIA document declared that it is firm and continuing policy that Allende will be overthrown by a coup. Henry Kissinger's 40 committee and CIA plan to impede Allende's investiture as president of Chile with covert efforts known as Track 1 and Track 2. Track 1 sought to prevent Allende from assuming power via parliamentary trickery, while Track 2 was the CIA trying to convince key Chilean military officers to carry out a coup. Mm-hmm. And recent documents declassified under the Clinton administration showed that the United States government and the CIA sought to overthrow Allende in 1970, immediately before he took office. Mm-hmm. Many documents regarding the United States intervention in Chile remain classified. Those that have been declassified showed that Nixon, Kissinger, and the United States government were aware of the coup and plans to overthrow Allende's democratically elected government. This is Allende's birth chart. He has a whole bunch of planets in Cancer. So Cancer is associated with nurturing, the desire to provide for people, the desire to, keep people fed and housed and comforted. His sun is on the South Node in Cancer. That points to the idea that at some point in his life, and he was born before an eclipse, like right before an eclipse. So an eclipse is symbolic of endings, especially throughout history, throughout ancient times. Leaders were killed or assassinated around eclipses. And so here in his birth chart, he was born before an eclipse. So that tends to point that at some point in his life, his light will be shut out. I mean, luckily he did live like late 60s or 70s. So he did live a long time and he was able to accomplish a lot. But then the aftermath of the coup, everything that he had accomplished in his life was snuffed out. Mm-hmm. And from your perspective and from what you learned from your parents, and what happened after the coup, what was life in Chile like?
So my parents describe kind of the time leading up to it as a lot of like civil unrest, a lot of people who were believing the news and the propaganda that was happening at the time. So I think one of the like an important part of like what their phases of 1 and phase 2 were getting the propaganda out that Allende was doing a lot of wrong and a lot of bad for the country. And they used ITT as kind of like a way to kind of funnel money into the country to then support all this propaganda.
And ITT,
that's a
was that
right wing paper.
yeah, ITT, was that the telecom company?
Yeah, the
Okay.
telecom
Okay.
and telegraph.
They were very reliant on like the American owned copper mines for their copper wiring. Is that
Yeah, and
part of
they
it?
also had major US ownership of the company as well.
Okay.
So it was kind of like leaning into an American company that lived and operated in Chile, which was something that Allende was definitely like, no, we want like Chile for Chileans, not in American economic interests
Mm-hmm.
coming in and taking our resources without fair, exchange for those resources. So like they controlled media, and through that media, we're able to kind of like get some like strikes that were happening in the streets. So my dad and my mom were watching these strikes happen that were all like anti-Allende, pro overthrowing this president who's done all these terrible things to the country, and trusting their gut of like none of that is true. Like all of that
Yeah.
is bullshit compared to what I actually see happening in all of these social realms. Because again, they're like college students in their like late teens, and they're looking around and they're seeing, the homes that are being built, and they were part of that movement that was, going out into the country and teaching literacy, and seeing all the social good that was happening, and
Yeah.
then hearing this kind of like this drumbeat of lies through the media that were coming through. So um, they were doing all of the protesting. They were out in the streets, and when the political coup happened, like that turnover, there was an immediate arrest of a lot of professors and college students because they were the rabble rousers. They're the ones out there being the most vocal. And universities were closed down. There was an immediate curfew set. They took the risk of going out in the middle of the night and, painting the murals that they painted, leaving behind the posters and everything to kind of just like remind people that despite the immediate oppression of this dictatorship that took over on September 11th, that hope was still out there, that people still were fighting. They couldn't do it in the light of day anymore.
Fascinating. And it's so interesting that I'll have to describe his chart for those listening. He has his sun in Cancer, which is like applying to a conjunction with the South Node. He has Neptune in Cancer, Mercury retrograde in Cancer, Venus in Cancer, Venus retrograde in Cancer, and Mars in Cancer. And wait a minute, is that Mars in Cancer? Yes, yeah. Mars in Cancer. Everything's so close together, it's like hard to see. But so basically like Neptune, Venus, Mercury are all conjunct. And so some keywords that come up when like Mercury and Neptune are conjunct are like lies being told about him. We don't have his exact rising sign, so we can't determine anything like that. But it's, the moon and Pluto in a Mercury ruled Gemini. Yeah, confusion. Even with his death, like we're not exactly sure if it was a suicide or if he was killed. So there's just so much confusion around the whole thing of his presidency. And he also has, to make things even more confusing, he has Uranus opposite Neptune. So Uranus, that planet of change, that planet of like advancing technology, opposite Neptune, wall conjunct his Mercury retrograde. And so there's just so much confusion. It seems like there's other forces at work just making things extremely, there's idealism, but confusion are basically two big words that are coming up as I'm looking at his chart here. And he has Saturn in Aries, which is where Saturn is in its detriment. So Saturn being ruled by Mars, Saturn, the planet of death, being ruled by Mars, the planet of, attacks, next to Jupiter, like the planet that deals with foreign travel. So we do kind of see that theme of like an attack coming from abroad. It's really, really interesting. It's interesting that death is such a signature in his chart with, since he worked in a morgue when he was studying
Mm.
medicine after graduating. So that's really interesting. The So kind of the timeline of the coup is at 8:30 a.m. armed forces declared their control of Chile, and that Allende was deposed. Um,
Mm.
and that at that point he grasped the magnitude of the military's rebellion. Despite the lack of military support, Allende refused to resign his office, and this here happened during Libra Rising, 8:30 a.m. So he's still trying to with Venus and Libra there. Really interesting. But Mars ruled the other party. So like he is trying his best to work things out, but Mars which is the seventh house, is ruled by Mars, and Mars at that point is in the eighth house of death. So at this moment, and then look at Saturn is almost conjunct the south node there, or the north node there. This is right before you were born. So
Mm.
his desire to bring um, bring nourishment and sustenance and comfort to the people is being cut off by Saturn, that planet of death and endings.
Mm.
So even just you look at the chart of like 8:30 a.m. when this is all going down, you can tell that this is not going to have a good ending, because even as the ascendant continues turning, we're going to go into Scorpio, where a Mars that's very debilitated in Taurus is going to be ruling. And interestingly, this point in Mars and Taurus, was when that January 6th happened, where all of those crazy GOP people
Mhm.
tried to stop the US election.
The
That
attempted
would,
insurrection.
yeah, the attempted insurrection, that was Mars and Taurus. So it's all going to, and then at 9, the armed forces controlled Chile, except for the city central of Santiago. And they declared they would bomb the presidential palace. And they eventually did bomb the presidential
Yeah.
palace, which is crazy. And at 10:30 a.m., Allende gave his farewell speech telling the nation that the coup d'etat was happening, but he refused to resign, elected under threat. And he did tell his daughter, like, a while before this happened, that he would either leave the presidential office, as the president, or he would leave, feet first in a body bag or something like that. So he said something like that. So he did make it clear, you'll have to carry out my dead corpse. I'm
Mm.
not leaving. His farewell speech said, "Workers of my country, I have faith in Chile and its destiny. Other men will overcome this dark and bitter moment when treason seeks to prevail. Keep in mind that much sooner than later, the great avenues will again be open through which we will pass free men to construct a better society. Long live Chile, long live the people, long live the workers."
Mm.
At 1:50 p.m., Allende ordered the defenders of the presidential palace to surrender. The defenders then formed a line on the second floor, down the stairs, and onto the street door. The president went along the line from the ground floor up the stairs, shaking hands and thanking everyone personally for their support in the difficult moment. At the end of the queue, Allende turned towards Independence Salon, located on the northeast side of the palace's second floor. And at the same time, a member of the infirmary staff decided to return upstairs to recover his gas mask. He wanted to take it as a souvenir, and he heard a noise and opened the door of the salon in time to see the president shoot himself with his AK-47, or so he says, from the other side of the salon. And through an open door, another doctor and a member of the cabinet and a functionary and 2 detectives were able to see the moment of death. A lot of people, and a few others were attracted by the noise. And this is the moment of the death, which is a Capricorn rising chart with Jupiter in Aquarius in the second house, the moon in the third house, in Pisces, and the moon is ruling the seventh house of other people. And interestingly, the Mars at this point is in the fifth house, which is Taurus, and Pluto is really close to the midheaven in Libra. And I wonder, and at this point, Virgo is the ninth house, which rules other like foreign travel, foreign countries. And we have both Mercury and the sun in Virgo. So that's a very strong part of the chart, but also the 10th house, which has Pluto there. And maybe that Pluto and on the midheaven might have been like the moment of his death. And the moon had just finished a square to Neptune at that point. But since this is a day chart, Mars is the most malefic planet and Jupiter is retrograde. Jupiter is the most benefic planet. It's retrograde. And so the Mars there in the fifth house is like pointing to this is going to be a bad time for the future of Chile's children, for the future of any good fortune coming to Chile because of this event. Really, really interesting. Allende's death marked the beginning of a dark period in Chilean history. The military treated Chile like an occupied country. Football stadiums and army barracks became detention centers. Hundreds of thousands of people were arrested and detained over the next few months. Foreigners were sought out as members of a supposed guerrilla army that had been assembled under Allende. Soldiers disobeying orders were shot. Senior officers perceived as close to Allende were arrested and tortured, and some were killed. The ordinary members of Chile's left-wing parties and the trade unions were hunted down, and many were killed and disappeared. How did your parents escape the country?
So my parents continued to be involved in just as covertly as possible, being anti-dictatorship, anti-Pinochet. My mom's home in Concepcion, Chile, was the secret police came to the door, and my mom wasn't home, but they raided her room and they turned everything over. So my mom never returned to that home. And from, if I remember the story correctly, they kind of left within like a 24-hour period of the secret police looking for her in her mom's home. They escaped over the mountains into Argentina. They left me behind to be with my grandparents on my dad's side of the family in Santiago. And I think for about a year or so, we're in Argentina, trying to just figure out how to start life with as an undocumented political refugees into Argentina. So like figure out how to make money and where to survive, or how to survive, where to live, how to get reunited with me after needing to flee under those circumstances. And so they lived in Argentina for a while, but then you mentioned, Operation Condor. My dad is listed as a person of interest in a list of people who there was an equal exchange program for the cops on both sides of the borders. So like Argentina would capture all the Chileans that had fled and trade them over to Chile for all of the Argentinians who had fled the military regime that was happening and all the turmoil that was happening in Argentina, fleeing into Chile, and they would just be this exchange of the people that they've been arresting. So they found themselves again in trouble in Argentina and unable to kind of like just be safe there. And I don't know what the direct connection is, but a family in Burlington, Iowa fundraised to try and rescue a family from like the fires of South America at that time. And somehow we're able to like connect with my family in Chile and like lifted us all up, my mom, my dad, my brother, and me, out of Buenos Aires, Argentina, tossed us in a plane and flew us across into the United States and smack into Burlington, Iowa.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was 5 years old by that point.
Just basically, was this someone that your parents knew, or just
no, it was just like a family in Burlington, Iowa, who were just passionate about like, we got to do something. What can we do? And they wanted to try to support so immigrants fleeing all of those areas. So they just fundraised through their church and through the church, we're able to connect with human rights and humanitarian organizations in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and somehow my family won that lottery of just getting scooped out of like all of that political turmoil and popped off into Burlington, Iowa.
Oh my God, that's like the most luckiest break.
Mm-hmm.
And you are a Jupiter ruled ascendant. So Jupiter is the planet associated with luck. So I
Mm.
wonder if have you ever had any other just like lucky, wow, that was a lucky thing that happened to me.
Oh yeah, lots. Lots and lots.
That's amazing. What's another lucky story?
Oh God. Let's see. I think that kind of tying back into like following my instinct and be like, maybe I'll take a pause for just a second. I used to ride when I first moved to California, I didn't have a car, so we were able to afford a single motorcycle between us. And I used to get to work on my motorcycle, and two near-death experiences on the motorcycle,
Oh,
where like, in one of them, my buddy was in his truck behind me. I was working in tile, and like he's sitting in the truck behind me. I'm waiting for the light to change, and the light turns green, and me on my little motorcycle, like just take a pause for a moment, just a moment to be like, okay, like I don't know why, but I'm not going to like gun it on this
yeah.
green light. And in that flash of a little bit of time, like this semi truck just like flies through the intersection
Oh,
on
wow.
and like the way, and my buddy behind me tells me, because he was like 9 sheets wider than he normally was. um like the timing of when I would have, if I had just gunned it, I would have just been a little gnat on the grill of
Yeah.
that truck. So like, and I remember having a flash of like, give me a pause, just a second before I like step my foot out into
That's
that intersection.
amazing.
And then there was a second like total luck, trusting my instinct. While on the motorcycle, I was following a truck that had like some plastic sheeting, like just kind of flapping in the wind, and I was like, that is going to fly off any second now. So I had taken my hand off the throttle, and I was just starting to slow down a little bit, when that damn thing like took off and like hit me,
Oh,
and I caught it on my shoulder and onto my torso, but it missed my face and it missed my front tire, and I was able to, like shaking like a leaf, pull over off the highway and onto the shoulder, and then just kind of like sit there until like the shaking like subsided enough to be able to like wrap up the plastic. And
wow. That's
so yeah, a lot of but like lucky breaks like that, I don't know. Yeah.
And it's interesting that both lucky breaks are things related to moving and transportation because the third house is often associated with transportation and how you get around. And so you
Mm.
have lucky breaks. It seems like your siblings probably have been also very lucky in their life because your third house rules your siblings, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
your siblings are a source of luck for you as well.
They're definitely a source of joy.
Yeah,
Like we get together and we turn into like a troop right out of Monty Python. We just make each
I
other
love
laugh. We're just a bunch of clowns. It's so much fun.
I love that. So out of something that's so dark, that's you know, luck and joy happen. But sure, this was absolutely devastating for Chile. The
Mm-hmm.
period prior to the coup was a time when Chile was a middle class country with about 30% or 9 million Chileans being middle class. The collapse of Chilean democracy marked the end of democratic governments and end of elections that have been held since 1932. And historian Peter Wynne described the 1973 coup as one of the most violent events in Chilean history. So as I said, I was trying to find films,
Mm-hmm.
biographies, anything. So I think for people who do not live in the United States, you can watch Salvador Allende by Patricio Guzman, which is a biography of Allende and the coup. Seems like it's a really good film. I would love to find a way to get a hand. Yeah, I think I have to get like a DVD player, and so I can like buy the DVD and play the
Right.
DVD. But I would love to hear from anyone if you happen to watch that film. I would love to know about it. And that covers the Chilean coup,
Mm.
and also your life. So you have just finished a second house year, which means that you have done a lot of thinking about your finances and how you make money and your relationship, how you share resources with other people, and
Mm.
any debts. Had you been thinking about that for the last year or so?
Well, yeah, in separating, we own a home together. So just kind
Mm.
of like the kind of slogging through the reality, the adulting and the realities of kind of how to how to pull apart a life that has like been kind of so matched in together all for all these years. Um, and that includes property and finances and weirdness like that. So yeah, it's definitely been on my mind a lot.
And
And also like figuring out like how to make photography a thing for me. Like I want to live the rest of my life in the creative realm. Like I want to be a creative person surrounded by creative people in that frenetic energy of magic making, and like how to segue into that so that I like can make a living off of it. And I'm not like the job I have now is fine, but it's definitely a job where like I'm a shadow of myself in the time that I'm there. Like I just go in and I do the job and I get out. And life is too short to even do that at this point. Like I just want to be fully immersed in creativity at all times. So how
yeah,
how to make a life in a system where we can't just barter.
yeah,
um,
yeah. I
yeah.
think you will figure it out. So you're now in your third house year, which is that year where Jupiter is activated for you. So you're gonna have start having a lot of luck, now that you've had your birthday recently, and Jupiter's going through your sixth house of work. So this when I had Jupiter in my sixth house, I changed jobs,
Mm,
um and so maybe you might be changing jobs
mm,
too. Uh, but you're going to have a lot of luck. So, especially if really it's just like walking around and communicating and reaching out to people, and you through your siblings and stuff, you're going to have a lot of luck. I think you're going to figure it out what you need to do with the photography thing. Um, especially like, yeah, you'll figure it out. But it seems like you might be doing a lot of moving around and traveling and stuff this year. And it seems like in by your next birthday, you're going to be thinking about where you want to live permanently. And you
mm,
might be moving a long distance from where you are currently now. So it won't necessarily be this year, but your next birthday, that year after your next birthday, that is when you will likely be moving, probably uh, far from where you currently live now.
mm. All right.
Are you thinking of
Yeah.
moving anywhere?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think once we figure out like sale of a house, I would I have family here in San Diego, but like I would love to figure out how to live in LA, but I also want to start kind of maybe setting some roots in Chile again,
Yeah.
because my mama is, ready to retire, and like I'm looking down the road at like where do I want to spend the last of my days. And I think being closer to like our larger network of family is makes sense. And here in the United States, it's just immediate siblings and then my mom and my dad. So
Yeah.
Chile makes sense. So figuring out how
Yeah.
to make that happen would be great.
I think you might be traveling at least to Chile at your after your next birthday. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so definitely see that there happening for you. Yeah.
I've actually done a lot of traveling like in this year through the fandom. Like I went to and for the first time too, right? So like
Yeah.
here I am like kind of separating from my partner of 27 years and like traveling by myself to a thing that I want to do just for me. So I went to ECC by myself, or
Yeah.
ECCC. Um, and that was like the first time I met people in real life through the fandom, the first time I traveled alone to a con, the first time I traveled with like some idea of maybe doing some cosplay while I was there. So I traveled with like my whole cosplay outfit and everything. So like that was a first on a lot of levels. And since then, I went to like New York. I've been up and down to LA so many times with the strike. Like all of that has been in like this like a kind of new the newness of uh
Your new life.
my new life of being kind of single again, or being myself again, and being like
Pursuing piracy.
Pirates por vida.
In your little car named the Revenge.
A little Prius revenge pirate ship. Yeah, yeah.
Lovely. Well, it was so great talking to you.
Oh, Carly.
Where can people find you online?
So through Twitter, I'm still kind of running the WGA underscore fandom love on Twitter, and that was kind of like the beginning of our flag means strike kind of offshoot to just bring together people who are parts of fandoms who want to support people who are on strike within the industries of the stories that they love. So the writers, the actors, down the road IATSE. So that's something that I want to kind of keep up and running as like a point place for fandom intersecting with people who are in the industry and needing support from fandom. And then I have through Instagram and through TikTok, just my photography, which is Fangirl Photo, FOTO, is where I've been putting up all of my pictures for the strike, and also like the pictures that I've been taking from all of the cons that I've been attending as well. So those are the two main ones that are fun. And then I've got like a storytelling one of what is it? What do I call it? Vieja Gen Xa. So like old Gen X lady.
Love it.
That's both on TikTok and Instagram as well. And that one is just building it up to be like a little bit of a storytelling, reflections on life. I've had a lot of different careers in these many years, and like just a lot of cool stories to tell about those, what I've learned in all those different career paths. So like wanting that little space to kind of tell stories, and that's where I've been kind of slowly building. The very first post of that is post splitting up with my partner and like kind of figuring some shit out.
So for someone who is like, maybe I should take this leap and, leave my partner, start a new life, do something like that, what would your advice be to them?
So I think why it lasts 27 years is because my partner's like a genuine friend. Like I love spending time with her, and we are very good friends. But it's a study of like how much compromise is too much compromise. And I was starting to lose myself in that relationship. I was starting to lose who I am. And the further I got away from like who I became, the more like desire I had to like just get back to being about passion and fire, and like just running and just sprinting off into the night. So kind of like that split, like the more we became domesticated, like the more feral I wanted to be.
I love that.
So not to wait that long. But to kind of like honor the fact that like you are an individual who deserves to live a full life, and if that means that you have to be alone for a little while to do it, then like it's worth kind of fighting through the fear of letting go of something that's constant and familiar, for the trade-off of discovering who you are and finding something new. So like post breakup, I started an Instagram account. I got a whole sleeve tattoo about the new fandom that I fell into. And I joined an improv group. So like I like threw myself face first into things that were really super scary and really challenging, and have come through it like really fucking happy.
Yes.
Really happy to be here. So it was worth the letting go of security and familiarity, and a comfort that was no longer a comfort, to get here. But yeah,
I'm proud of you.
We only have this one life.
Yes, I'm proud of you. You did so much. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Music for the show is provided by Bruno Loureiro. Follow us on Instagram at The Astrology of Terrible Things, all one word.